Welcome to RICS Europe. Today we're taking a closer look at how the EU handles vaping and alternative nicotine products and why the debate has intensified after the major UN Health Conference COP11 in Geneva, which is the conference of the parties where countries set global guidelines on tobacco and nicotine. Joining me today is Michael Landl, Director of the World Vapers Alliance. Welcome to RICS Europe.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Well, at COP11, the EU raised concerns about vaping, and you, Mr. Landl, you have said that the EU Commission has been pushing misinformation on vaping for a long time. Can you tell us more about what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, if we just look at this year, we have seen a launched wave of misinformation, I would actually call it, by the Commission, especially the two commissioners, Högstra and Vaheli. They came out with, I would say, to some extent wrong or at least misleading statements. Högstra, for example, said smoking kills, vaping kills, and it's just not true. Vaping doesn't kill. Vaping is around for more than 20 years, and there is not a single death attributed to non-illegal vapes. So it's just a wrong statement, and Vaheli stated similar things. He started with claiming that nicotine causes cancer, then he got called out for it and had to backtrack a little bit, and now he's claiming that vaping and nicotine pouches have similar risk profiles than smoking, which is also not true. We have scientific evidence that vaping and nicotine pouches are way less harmful. And it's very unfortunate because it's not the position of the two commissioners and not their private opinion. They even stated in written answers to members of the European Parliament that that is the EU Commission's position. And we have seen that at COP11 last week as well. So it's a long running point of view from the Commission. They try to implement bans and more restrictions on less harmful alternatives while leaving cigarettes more or less untouched. And I think that is the wrong approach.
Yeah, well, as you've been saying, we also see that at COP11, Sandra Galina, Directorate General for Health, she claimed that vaping and other reduced risk nicotine products pose significant public health risks. And she also questions the effectiveness of vaping in helping smokers quit. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, both statements are plainly wrong because we know even from the EU Commission's own numbers, the Eurobarometer on tobacco, that 98% of vapers are former smokers. So considering that vaping is way less harmful, it is a public health benefit if more smokers switch from deadly smoking to less harmful alternatives such as vaping. So for public health, it's a net gain if more people would switch to vaping. And also, this alone, but other scientific evidence shows that vaping is a very effective smoking cessation aid. The Cochrane review, which is always held as one of the gold standards when it comes to scientific literature reviews, found that vaping is twice as effective for smoking cessation than gums and patches and those traditional smoking alternatives. So both parts of her statement are simply wrong. And the worst part about it is she didn't get called out for it at COP11, since COP11 is a pretty much echo chamber of prohibitionists and anti-nicotine people. So there she was applauded instead of being called out for simply wrong statements, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, because we've seen that the EU often claims to be evidence-based. Why do you think harm reduction science is being overlooked or ignored in the EU's current approach?
Unfortunately, it's probably a simple thing. It's a bit ideology driven, and it shows a bit this deeply rooted anti-innovation mentality, especially in the Commission. Because for decades, tobacco control was basically quit smoking or die. There are no alternatives. But then a new innovation 2 decades ago came along with vaping and more recently with nicotine pouches, where we finally can consume nicotine in a less harmful way compared to smoking. And unfortunately, since it's a new thing, it seems like this anti-innovation mentality from the EU also applies for nicotine products. So I think this precautionary principle, which we see problematic areas of it in other fields, also applies for tobacco harm reduction, because there we have 15 plus year of robust science and a lot of real world evidence that all countries who implement harm reduction strategies are doing better than those who go back to the EU Commission's position of bans and prohibition. So it's also very inconsistently, because harm reduction also is completely accepted in other fields. For example, when it comes to drug use, we have needle exchange programs, methadone programs, even HIV. A condom is a harm reduction tool. Nobody would have ever the idea to say, let's have no more sex because we need to avoid HIV. But we find ways to reduce the risks. And vaping and nicotine pouches are risk reduced alternatives to smoking. And unfortunately, this anti innovation mentality from the EU Commission also comes into effect when it comes to this field of policy.
And if we get back to you, in your view, what are the biggest consequences for public health if the EU continues focusing on restrictions and bans?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem is that less people will quit smoking. And for public health, at least this is always the claimed goal for the EU Commission, to reduce the smoking rate below 5%. But then we have, for example, one very successful country with Sweden, who are almost there, but with a different approach. They are very open to harm reduction. They allow different products on the market, but the EU Commission doesn't look at it. They neglect this example completely. So if we go down this prohibition road further, we will have less people quitting smoking and worse public health outcomes. And all this wrong rhetoric from the EU Commission also puts a misconception into smokers' minds. So we see from surveys that more and more smokers believe that vaping is actually equally harmful or even more harmful than smoking. So this is another reason why less people will quit smoking via those alternatives. And I think if the Commission will keep doing those things, the goal of 5% smoke rate will never be achieved.
Well, you've also mentioned that critical debate is stifled at COP. Can you describe what more you witnessed that led you to say that?
I mean, COP is a strange conference. It is under the umbrella of the WHO and all the member parties. So it's not only the EU; it's countries from around the world who signed this treaty meet there every 2 years and discuss tobacco control measures. The problem there is it's complete secrecy. We, as a public, we don't know what's discussed behind the closed doors there. There are no independent public health experts in there. Obviously, there are no consumers allowed. So it's very intransparent and very one-sided. So everybody who has a different opinion is not welcome there. And the outcomes are like this. For years, we have seen more and more rhetoric and recommendations for restrictions and bans. And this year, I was a bit surprised because we saw a little bit of a different tone there. Because the WHO expected, as usually, everybody will agree with their positions, but we saw that more and more countries spoke up against this. And that's why they couldn't agree on any new bans or restrictions, and they were just postponed to the next COP. So I think the tide is changing there, but we definitely still need more transparency and more civil engagement at COP. Otherwise, these problems will not be solved.
And could you tell us a little bit about the Belgian government's plan to ban vaping flavors?
Yeah, I mean, it will be a failure again. We saw it in different countries who already implemented flavor restrictions or even flavor bans. The main problem, which I think politicians don't understand, that bans don't eliminate demand. So people want those kind of products. If we just ban it, it doesn't mean the demand stops existing. It just changes where people can fulfill their demand for flavor bans, and that is mainly the black market. We see in almost every country who implements flavor bans an explosion of the black market. Or when it comes to public health outcomes, we know consistently from all countries that about 50% of current users of flavors either go back to smoking, so make it worse for themselves, or they go on the black market, buy their flavors abroad, especially relevant for smaller EU countries like Belgium, where it's easy to cross the borders. So it's just unenforceable. And the problem, what politicians don't see, is that adults want those flavors. It's like banning ice cream flavors and saying only kids want them. It's just not true. It's very important for adults to have those flavors. It's only 2% of adults who only use tobacco flavor, which would be allowed in Belgium. So a lot of people will be pushed back again to smoking or the black market. And again,
Mm.
there is scientific evidence that it's not a good idea, because there are studies where they compare vapers who use just tobacco flavor or other kind of flavors. And those who use the flavors have a 230% higher chance of quitting smoking. So it's anti-science and anti-real world, again, unfortunately, and will have negative consequences.
Do we already see the consequences of this policy in the Netherlands?
Yeah, as you say, the Netherlands has a flavor ban, and just recently a consumer group, Akvoda from the Netherlands, did a survey among vapers, and there also we saw that a substantial part of vapers moved back to smoking. Only
Mhm.
2% of the vapers are actually using only the tobacco flavor, which is allowed. And instead, almost 90% of them, they buy legally. They do cross-border buying in Germany, or for now in Belgium. And the interesting part is even the youth vaping rate, which is always claimed that the flavor bans needs to be implemented because of youth vaping, went up after the flavor ban. So also that suggests the expanding black market also makes it easier for young people to get a hand on these products. So I think it will be the same in Belgium, and we will see similar outcomes. We should do the opposite, regulate those products in a risk proportionate way. Everything which is less harmful should be taxed less and regulated less strict. But then obviously the existing rules, like no sales for underage people, they need to enforce properly, instead of piling on more regulation which is not enforceable.
Well, thank you so much, Michael, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
And thank you for watching Rix Europe.